Brothers and sisters, the purpose of the meeting called tonight by the Scottish Socialist Party, as always, can be summed up as two main things. One is to end the meeting better informed, and the other is to be better organised against this vicious Tory tax as a result of the discussion we have. Because when the Tories took power with their lickspittle props to LibDems nearly 3 years ago, they told us all that we're all in it together, that there was a horrible economic mess, and that the way to solve it was by cutting back on the welfare budget, cutting back on public expenditure, cutting back on what they call bureaucracy, which actually really means people's jobs, people's services, people's wage packet. And when they announced that we're all in it together, the laughter across Scotland and beyond was fairly deafening, because what they meant was that you've got the same interests as the bankers, you've got the same interests as the billionaires, you've got the same interests as the people that led the economy to the brink of collapse and then got a bailout to the tune of 1.3 trillion, that's 1,300 billion pounds of public money, which was used to bail out the bankers, the people that caused the mess in the first place. And when they bailed them out in 2008, and when they told us we had to pay the price, allegedly we're all in it together, because we're all equal after all. We're all in the same boat. The boat's sinking, so we have to bail it out. That's the message of George Osborne, of David Cameron, of Clegg and people like that. It's the message of the Cabinet. But pause for a minute and remember that that same Cabinet, out of 29 members at the last count, 23 of them are millionaires, some of them multimillionaires. That's got very little in common with the millions of people who are struggling to survive, and survive on low pay, survive on even lower benefits, survive as profits rocket, and as the prices of things like fuel rockets, and things like the price of food rockets. All the cost of living that working class people have to endure is rocketing through the roof at the same time as wages, benefits, pay, income of all forms is going downwards. That's how much we're all in it together. Working class people are being exploited to the hilt, and one of the main weapons they've got is fear. Fear of not being able to fight back. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the future that this system holds out in front of us. But the other weapon that runs alongside this fear is the weapon of divide and conquer. Of dividing people, one from the other. Of dividing the unemployed from the employed. The sick and disabled from the rest of us. Dividing black from white. Dividing long-term residents from new incomers to the country that we live in. That kind of division is something that's part of the bloodstained history of the rulers of this country, actually, but it's something that you use day to day in a pernicious fashion. And actually the bedroom tax is a glaring and brutal example of those methods by the government and the rich that they represent, the rich that they are. Because they want to try and divide us. They want to try and defeat us by dividing us. And that's why it's important, even though the subject tonight is the bedroom tax, and that's what I'll concentrate on as well, it's important to set it in its context of the wider attacks that are taking place against working class people. For example, the fact that they're slaughtering jobs in tens of thousands, day by day, starting with the public sector, which then has the knock-on effect in the private sector, where because public sector workers are insecure in their jobs, have their pay cut, can't afford to spend as much, the knock-on effect is in the private sector also losing jobs and also losing pay as a result. And there's a threat of something in the region of 250,000 jobs being lost in the public sector, and the same amount again in the private sector if this Tory-led coalition has its way and gets away with it. And tomorrow there's a fight back taking place which should boost us all when it comes to fighting the bedroom tax. Because some of the very people they're expected to administer this pernicious attack on the lowest income families and households, are taking strike action against the cuts by the Tory government. Civil service workers in the PCS trade union, 250,000 of them, are out on strike across the UK tomorrow, including about 30,000 in Scotland. And that should be a boost to our morale in fighting back against the government, because the more fronts that they face, the better chance of defeating them. Which is why I think it's important to extend support to that group of workers when they take the action they are, on job losses, on pay cuts, on attacks on workers' rights, and so on. Because the bigger context of the bedroom tax, and the explanation for it, is fairly straightforward. On the very same day, on the 1st of April, April Fool's Day, when the Tories and LibDems obviously assumed that we're all fools because we don't spot this link, on that same day, as well as introducing the bedroom tax, they introduce another change in taxation. But the difference is, that is a cut in tax, and it goes to people on the incomes above 150,000 a year, being reduced from 50p to 45p in the pound of tax on that high income bracket. And it means concretely that every millionaire in this country enjoys a wage rise, if you want to call it that, of £107,000 a year from April the 1st onwards. That is one of the reasons they're introducing this brutal attack on the incomes of the lowest income people through the bedroom tax. Because the bedroom tax itself is a brutal wealth transfusion from the poorest to the richest, from the neediest to the greediest. And that sums up the nature of the government and indeed the capitalist system that we're living under. Because what they're doing is trying to rob £2 billion of the poorest over the next 2 years in order to give £3 billion in tax cuts to the millionaires and their hangers-on in the slightly lower income bracket of 150,000 a year. That is the summation of the system that we have to fight, that we have to resist. Because what they've decided is that they need to cut the welfare benefit bill. So, for example, they've already assaulted the sick and disabled in an absolutely merciless fashion. They've demonised them. They've used expressions like making a distinction between the skivers and the strivers, the shirkers and the workers. And by the way, it's not just the Tories that have used that expression, it's New Labour as well. New Labour leaders have used exactly the same terminology of abuse towards people unable to work and trying to scrimp and save to eke out an existence on the low benefits that they get. Shame on them when they claim to represent working class people historically. Shame on them, they've abandoned the working class that's set them. And they try to divide us, to demonise the sick and the disabled. They use private companies like ATOS, a French outfit that doesn't even hire doctors fully trained. They use the likes of students and sometimes maybe even nurses. And they decide whether you're fit for work. Whether you're fit for work. In fact, the place that people go in Glasgow is known as Cadogan Street to some people, but to most of us it's been rechristened Lourdes. Because there's miracle cures that take place compared to when you go in and come out again. Because people who are literally dying of cancer have been declared fit for work and died a matter of weeks later. It's an absolute crime. It's inhumane, and it sums up the system we have to resist and that we want as a Scottish Socialist Party to replace root and branch. They're attacking the sick and the disabled already, but now they've come for a new form of attack. For example, they've introduced the cap on benefits of 1% increase maximum over the next 3 years in a row. Now, what they tried to do in the build-up to that was this divide and rule trick, the terminology of the shirkers and the workers, the skivers and the strivers. But they've got a problem in doing that, because actually 65% of the people that are facing a cut in their incomes because of those caps on benefit are actually in jobs. It's things like working tax credit, it's things like family tax credit, child benefits and so on, that are being capped at 1%. In other words, being cut when you compare it to the price of food, the price of fuel, the price of public transport, the price of living, the price of existence. That is the problem for them in their divide and rule trickery. Unfortunately, they get away with it on the television because the major parties are all agreed on the need to attack the poorest to give more money to the multimillionaires, Labour included. That's the criminal situation we face. And when the Tories and LibDems decided they want to introduce what we've all nicknamed the bedroom tax, they looked at the opposition in Westminster across the benches. They saw the Labour worthies sitting on the benches and they thought to themselves, we haven't got a problem here. We can get this through without any real stiff resistance. That's one of the reasons they did that. And what they've brought in the bedroom tax is in some respects even more vicious than the poll tax of Maggie Thatcher in the past. And why do I say that? Because it's actually more divisive. It's consciously divisive. The one advantage for fighting the poll tax was the fact that it hammered virtually everybody, apart from the dukes and lords of society. It hammered the vast majority of the population, and there was therefore the greater opportunity to unite them in resistance through mass non-payment to bring down the poll tax and its architect, Maggie Thatcher. And many of us were veterans of that struggle in organising it. But when they brought in the bedroom tax, it's less people affected directly. They hope therefore they can get away with it by dividing us. But when I say less, it's certainly a large number. Across the whole of the UK, the government's own estimate is that 666,000 people are being hit by the bedroom tax. In Scotland, it's 105,000 people are being affected by the bedroom tax. And of those numbers, roughly 2/3 of them have a member of the household who is disabled. And they've also calculated that across Britain, of the 666,000 affected, at least 95,000 of them will literally be unable to pay it from day one. And obviously the proportion in Scotland is probably slightly higher even than that figure. Literally unable to pay. Not making a principled decision about whether it's justified. Not deciding that it's morally objectionable, even though it is, but literally having to choose between eating and paying the bedroom tax. What a choice. Because what it involves is saying that people who live on their own or live as a couple are only legally entitled to one bedroom if they're on housing benefit in the social sector of housing associations and council houses. One bedroom. Now that might not sound all that punitive when you've got a couple living together only having the one bedroom. But leaving aside the occasions when, for emotional reasons, they don't sleep in the same bedroom, more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that there's umpteen cases of couples who literally cannot sleep in the same bedroom. And we've come across scores of them telling us their business at the street campaign stalls of the SSP in Irvine and all over the Scotland, actually. People where one of the couple have such bad health that they literally cannot sleep in the same bedroom. But the Tory party, the party of compassion, where we're all in it together, make no allowance for that kind of situation. But of course the Tory party, they tell us, is the party of the family. So what happens if you're part of a family with children? Well, if the children are under 10, they're expected to share the same bedroom. I've got an 8-year-old, and he in recent months has already started talking on occasions about how he wants privacy. And that's part of maturing, it's part of growing up. But the party of the family make no allowance for that. They can be boy and girl, it doesn't matter. They're expected to share the bedroom up to the age of 10. And if they're teenagers, up to the age of 16, if they're of the same gender, they're expected to sleep in the same bedroom. Otherwise their parents are punished with the bedroom tax for the other bedroom. What a care and sharing society we have under capitalism, under Tory-LibDem rule. It's abominable when you look at the cases such as that. Or you get the disabled people. Like I said, 2/3 of those households affected, roughly speaking, have a disabled member of the family. And they make no allowance whatsoever for the fact that disabled people quite often need an extra room for things like medical equipment, and changing whatever dressings and other things that they require, or for storage of the wheelchair, whatever it might be. They make no allowance for that. It's classified as a spare room, a taxable room, a source of income for the Tory government to give over to the millionaires in their tax cuts. That's the kind of society we live in today. The only way that the disabled are exempt, even though sometimes they need a member of the family to sleep over, even if they have a member of the family sleeping over with them 24/7, they are not exempt, because that is not classified as a recognised professional care. The only way they can be exempt is if they have a care service with recognised professionals, care workers, registered, staying in the so-called spare bedroom as part of the care duties that they require. That's the only form of exemption for the disabled. What a cruel, vicious attack on some of the most vulnerable sections of society by the rich, the powerful, the brutal, the ruling class, the capitalist class that are represented in Parliament by the Tories and LibDems, and actually to some extent now also by New Labour. And of course, to tell working class families, educate yourself, get a good education and you'll have a future. Well, leaving aside the number of graduates working in minimum wage jobs, including people I work alongside, leaving that aside, when you are a student, if you don't live at least 2 weeks of the year in that family bedroom, it's taxed. That might not sound all that difficult, 2 weeks, but pause for this. When the universal credit comes in, which is a different form of attack on benefits, with a lump sum once a month, you apply for everything online, even if you don't have a computer, all of that, you're expected to budget and pay the rent out of the lump sum that you get, regardless of the problems you have of surviving and paying for food and shelter. When that comes in, it changes the rule about students in the bedroom, because then they have to spend a minimum of 6 months in the family home, otherwise the room is taxed under the bedroom tax. How the hell are they expected to study at university and spend 6 months of the year in their bedroom at the same time? That is a smokescreen, the current setup. And up until a week or so ago, it was also the case that when you get the adverts on television for more and more foster parents to volunteer, because of the crisis of care for children, the children that desperately need the love and care of a foster parent for all sorts of different reasons, then the reward for being a foster parent included the fact that foster children were not classified as permanent residents under this legislation, and therefore the room would be taxed under the bedroom tax. Now, even that became too much for the Tories, and they decided that to appear to give some kind of a concession. So a week and a half ago, in the face of public uproar, they granted a concession on the foster parents. Likewise, the areas that are worst affected by the bedroom tax are the areas of multiple deprivation. Towns like this, housing schemes in Glasgow, in Dundee, in Edinburgh and so on, where working class kids are bombarded by recruitment material, including at their schools and career days and so on, by the armed forces, to recruit them, to then send them to the killing fields of Afghanistan, maybe in the future of places like Syria and God knows where else. If the imperialist monsters of America and Britain have their way, they'll drag these young kids out of the unemployment cesspits that they live in and throw them in, allegedly, to get a trade, and the trade becomes death, and sometimes their own death. That is the situation in reality facing working class families quite often, where the only choice is the army for their sons or sometimes their daughters. So what does the bedroom tax do about that? Up until last week, the Tories had issued the diktat that the room, the bedroom, that those squaddies were coming back to on leave would be taxed under the bedroom tax. And that, again, along with the foster carers thing, caused such uproar that they've given that as a concession to the public outcry. But let's keep this in perspective. On the one hand, it means that protest, that anger, when organised and channelled, can actually win concessions out of this brutal government. But let's keep it in perspective, because actually only 5,000 people are affected by one of the measures, and less than 5,000 by the other, by the foster carers and the army personnel. So less than 10,000 people, and that's not in Scotland, it's in the whole of Britain, are given concessions by the Tory government in their minor retreat last week. My attitude to it is, they're slowly stepping backwards in the teeth of opposition. Don't stop, chase them.